they're not going to put the time and the effort and the perseverance into doing. And that can easily become a competitive advantage that you will always have, because they're not going to try to copy the stuff that's hard. Early on in my time as a college baseball coach, it became apparent to me as a young coach who was single, we didn't have the same resources that our competitors had in almost every way, shape, and form. We played in a city-owned park. We actually had no scholarships for my first 4 years as a head coach, and only got a really small amount of scholarship money during my last couple years. We had a really insignificant operating budget for staffing, for travel, all that stuff. I mean, I could go on and on about the things we didn't have, but you still, as a competitor, you want to win. So it forced me to think about, well, where can I create some advantages? And some of the things that became painfully obvious was I could do things that others wouldn't do. Not that they couldn't do, but that they wouldn't do. And it turned out that was really what transformed that program. We were recruiting people from the West Coast. I was happy to call them at 11 o'clock at night or 11:30 at night, my time, and it was, a much earlier in the evening in Pacific time. Knowing that the other people that I was competing against, who were older, who were married, who had families, they weren't gonna be on the phone at 11 or 11:30 at night. I would go around and work camp after camp during the summer to try to get opportunities to ask more successful, more experienced coaches things that I could do to be better, to try to learn, when learning may not have been quite as easy back then, because you couldn't just browse the internet and figure everything out and have immediate access to expertise on Twitter or something like that. So I would spend a week away traveling while these guys were at home, or maybe they went on vacation. I was quick to reinvent what we did when a lot of other people wouldn't, because that's not what they knew and that's not how they did things there. And so these were all things that were available to anybody, but they weren't willing to do them. And so when I started my business career, I thought about, like, what can we do, not that others can't do, but that they won't do. And a lot of that came down to just being personal, building relationships, being consistent. And all of that sounds really, really simple. But if we think about being consistent, I've written a daily email newsletter for over 20 years without missing a day. That's available to anybody. Everybody has access to the same softwares that I have. Everybody has access to the same information that I might use to formulate ideas and create topics. But nobody, zero, no other person, and certainly no other sane person, would even consider writing for essentially almost 8,000 days without missing a day. And that, to me, was kind of the embodiment of this. It's not that other people can't do it, it's that they won't do it. They're not going to maybe do the detail stuff with consistency. They're not going to invest in relationships. I see it so often that people do get really transactional. They have clients or they have athletes and they don't know anything about them other than what is relevant to them in that environment. They don't know anything about their family. They don't know anything about their home life. They don't know anything about them as a human being. They just know about what their goal is from a fitness standpoint, or maybe how they perform on the field, or maybe what their major is at the college. And it's such a missed opportunity, because there are so many ways that you can compete and win by simply doing things that your competitors won't, not that they can't. And the idea of winning by doing things that people can't do has become increasingly difficult, because for me, I know that some of the things that made us successful as a college baseball program wouldn't work nearly as well now. There were things that gave us a competitive advantage, the way that we would go develop players. Much easier to go get that same information I was having to hop on an airplane or go to a clinic or something to get. You can now get through looking at your phone, right? You You get a course or you watch some videos and it's all immediately accessible to you. Same thing in business, right? I would go through the trouble of figuring out how to do things very early on, like running paid advertising online, before any of our competitors were going to do it. But now it's all very simple to figure out, and there are tutorials, and it becomes an almost indefensible way to do things. And in fact, your competitors can essentially copy everything that you do when it comes to online advertising. So if you're looking for an advantage when it comes to your professional work, the simplest thing that I could tell you is look at what your competitors, what your opponents aren't willing to do. Look at the things that they would have the potential to do, but they're not going to put the time and the effort and the perseverance into doing. And that can easily become a competitive advantage that you will always have, because they're not going to try to copy the stuff that's hard. They're always going to try to copy the stuff that's easy, the stuff where there's no friction. But if you're doing things where there is some friction, they're not going to want to copy that. And even if they start, they won't sustain it. And that becomes an advantage that you have for the long haul.